Hey there. Some of you were mentioning buzzing in my recordings. I noticed that too. My laptop makes a little bit of a buzz, which it didn't used to, so I'm a little concerned about that. So far, the function seems to be okay, but I changed some of the settings, and I think that the audio should be not perfect, but much better on these. If they're not, obviously I'll know. But anyway, I wanted to talk about something a little bit different this time, and that's global warming. This is actually something I know a little bit about thanks to my job. Since I do basically geology work, I know a decent amount about Earth history. It's not one of my most, engaging issues. I'm obviously more interested in history and economics, political philosophy, but fossils, paleontology, anthropology, especially human evolution, have been uh, things I've been really interested in since I was a little kid. I have a couple gold medals from Science Olympiad about fossils to prove it, and I certainly know a lot more now than I did when I was 10. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about global warming. Now, before I talk about the actual whether the Earth is warming or not, I want to address the anthropogenic part because implicit in every argument for global warming is that humans affect the climate. Um, and actually that humans affect the climate in a negative way. And I have to say that I don't know that it's even possible to argue that humans don't affect the climate. Everything that we do, every time you breathe, every time you exhale, uh, changes the chemical composition of the atmosphere. A small amount, but actually a measurable amount. And breathing is not the most, how shall we say, influential activity that humans engage in. Uh, you know, even a butterfly flapping its wings, to use a really famous example, will affect the climate. Perhaps not in a way that we can measure, but that doesn't mean the effect isn't there. I think the claim that humans have no effect on the environment or the climate, and probably by extension the temperature, is probably extremely dubious. However, uh, what that effect is another question entirely. Now, uh, recently there seems to have been some shift among the purveyors of global warming, which I'm not going to address, but there's a whole other set of incentives and motives there that are independent of any kind of objective empiricism, but um, a shift away from global warming to uh, so-called climate change. Uh, Now, anyone who knows anything about Earth history knows that the climate is always changing. Perhaps the rate of change will be different, the direction of change will be different. But if we're going to take a single variable like temperature, the temperature is either going to be going up or it's going to be going down. There is no, it doesn't change. There's no such uh, state of nature. If you take just you know, any book on Earth history, you'll know that even if it doesn't explicitly say it. Now, when I was in high school, my high school textbook actually explicitly said that that's not the case because it said the weather changes every day, but the climate, that doesn't change. That's stable. False. That's not true. Uh, I think a lot of global warming alarmists um, think that they've got a, a home run case because they'll say, okay, look, uh, they'll pick an arbitrary date, say the start of the Industrial Revolution or just 1800 or after World War II or whatever, and they'll pick that date and they'll assemble some temperature data, which could be valid temperature data, and say, look, it's trending up since that point. Well, it was going to be trending up or it was going to be trending down. And so uh, there's no causal proof there. That's not to say that it wasn't causal, but I mean, it was going to be going up or down one way or the other. So there's that. The other problem is that the fact that it's warming. One thing you have to realize about temperature data is a huge majority of it is of the sample is based on the continental United States. Most of the world, there is far, far less data. The oceans, typically, we're talking about millions of square miles with maybe one or two buoys. I mean, that's not to say that's the only data that's available, but that's the only, scientists went out and attempted to actually get something that's unbiased. And then you look at the southern hemisphere, there's very little. So the data is skewed towards the climate in basically the United States and Western Europe. The temperature in the whole world could go down, but if the temperature in the lower 48 goes up, there's a chance that people might think that the temperature of the world is going up. I'm not saying that that's always the case, but the data set is not scientifically selected. The other problem is that the data actually conflicts a little bit. Like if we look at tree ring data versus ice core data, they actually point to different trends and different temperatures. There's the whole urban heating. Urban environments heat up a lot more in the summer. And then there is the problem that, I mean, the main problem though is that we don't even have any theory as to what the Earth's temperature should be if humans weren't around. Now that seems to me like that's a valid question to ask. What if we removed the variable on this planet known as humanity? What would the temperature and climate of the Earth be like? To me, that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. And if you want to make any claims about what effect we're having on the environment and the climate on net, you need to know that. If we don't know what the temperature of the world should be, then we cannot argue how much we've raised it, because we don't know what it would be if we weren't around. And there is nobody in the world who can claim to know what the temperature and the climate of the world ought to be if humanity was not around and never came about. It seems to me that most climatologists recognize that there are at least several cyclical cycles that have a major effect on the climate. The most obvious, of course, is the rotation of the Earth on its axis, which gives us night and day and generates an enormous amount of our weather. But then, of course, there's revolutions around the sun. The axis of the Earth actually wobbles. I think it's a 18,000 or maybe an 11,000 year cycle where, go grab my globe, but I'm not going to. That affects the weather. There is the solar cycle, of which there's probably more than one. I think the one that people are most familiar with is the 11-year cycle one with sunspots. There are a lot of people who think that that has an enormous effect on the amount of cloud formation. There is the magnetic poles. They invert every so often. We don't know how often. I don't know how often. Maybe there's an expert who does. And there's probably way more that I don't even know about, and there's probably more that nobody knows about. And then, of course, there are other things like continental drift. For instance, a lot of scientists actually claim that we are currently in an ice age because we have frequent glaciations. We're 10,000 years out of one. I'm not saying we're about to go into another one, but the evidence is that through much of history there weren't frequent glaciations like this. And it's alleged by some, and I think plausibly, because there's a nice lineup in the dates here, that this occurred when the peninsula of Panama connected with South America and formed the Isthmus of Panama. When this happened, ocean currents between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were altered enormously, and that when this happened, it caught, the net effect of that was to cause frequent glaciations. I'm not saying that's actually what happened, but you have all these cycles. One of them are the tectonic plates floating around, and even the experts on each one of these cycles don't know the full effect that they have on the climate, and none of them have integrated them in a convincing way. There are many who have tried to say, okay, let's put these all together, and you get these amazing graphs that, the climate goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. None of them are predictive, and even the people who work really hard on them and are proud of them, know these are the most rough ballpark estimates that are not, like I said, they're not predictive, and so we don't really know what the climate would be like if we weren't around. And then the other problem is, even if we did, how can we apply normative values to that? There's a lot of another thing that the alarmists, and I'm sorry for using the pejorative term, but I just feel like I should, will say that they know that global warming is bad because they say, well, if the sea level rises, which, by the way, the sea level goes up and down quite a bit. If you're on dry land right now, I almost can guarantee that you were under the ocean at one point. Depends where you were when that was, but anyway, they'll say, look, the water levels will go up, and people who live in low-lying coastal communities, they might be inconvenienced. They might either have to leave, or they might have to adapt a different type of living, or they might have to spend a lot of money building dikes or whatever. Of course, that's all possible, but it is also plausible that other people, perhaps even the same people, will benefit in some way. And if you haven't even asked what are the beneficial results of this, then you're in no position to say, well, on net it's going to be bad. If you're only looking at, if I eat a piece of corn and the only thing you say is, look, little Johnny over there, he doesn't have the corn that you just ate, so the fact that you ate that corn is bad because he was denied the ability to eat it. No, you didn't take into account that it was good for me to eat. And if you haven't even asked that question, then you aren't in a position to make, even to begin to make normative claims about what's going to happen. And the other thing is who even knows if that's going to, I hate hearing the polar bears are going to die. Polar bears have already survived at least one eradication of the ice. When they core those Greenland ice cores, when they get to the bottom of them, they find that the bottom of Greenland was a forest environment similar to like southern Norway, and that was 100,000 years ago. Well, polar bears evolved, so we're told, 200,000 years ago. So somehow they made it through all that, and they're still around, even though we keep being told they're all going to die and they can't swim, even though they can swim from Greenland to Iceland, apparently, because they do it every once in a while. So this is not comprehensive at all. Anthropogenic climate change is probably correct, but since we can't gauge it, and even if we could, that wouldn't be normative, the political solutions advocated by the alarmists are completely fallacious, even if they did work, which they don't.